I wasn't sure, and I wasn't sure with your last email whether we doing
I have it
recording or not.
recorded. We'll figure it out. I'm sure we can figure something out. I appreciate your flexibility there. But I am recording it right now.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Shall we
Whenever
give?
you're ready to take it away. Are we still waiting for a few people or you think you're ready?
So shall we give it like just a couple of minutes?
Oh,
I saw 11 people confirmed on Facebook.
Oh yeah, and we had I know we had 30.
We had 30 registrations.
This is the slide.
I'm ready, and the recording has just started.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to our webinar today. I love the title. It's not just you navigating a difficult hiring system. It is my pleasure to welcome Lynn, who is a job search strategist and founder of Bespoke Professional. I met her through one of the communities that we're part of at the Riveter, and as I met her and I've known her about her workshops, I kept asking myself, why did I not meet Lynn when I was in my job search, when I was being rejected by at least 50 plus companies? So I'm so grateful, Lynn, that you are here to share your knowledge today. And welcome everybody. We see some familiar faces from VR Pistachio. So we just want to talk a little bit about who we are and then move on to the goodies from Lynn. So if you want to move to the next slide, Lynn.
Yes.
So We Are Pistachio is a global community of for and by relocating spouses. We are built by relocating spouses. Our community exists to support each of you. If you want to drop in the chat, if whether you are a relocating spouse or where you relocated from, that would be great so that I know. And we want to really empower everyone to be their best self and navigate this adventure of relocation, because that in that journey, one realizes that I realized that I was alone at many times, and we want to change that. And that's why our promise is that as you relocate, whether you're looking for a job, whether you're looking for community, whether you are just seeking friendship, we want you to know that no relocating spouse is ever alone. And that is our pistachio promise. As I mentioned, in the next slide, we are built by relocating spouses. And a lot of times we're asked, why pistachio? I mean, what's in a name? Really, pistachio signifies a lot of what relocating spouses embody. So the open shell, we're really open. It takes a lot of openness to move to a new place. Pistachio is known as the happy nut in China. It's really important for relocating spouses to be happy. They're global, they're found over the world. Relocating spouses have to be tough to navigate that transition. And that last one is my favorite, that it takes a certain amount of nuttiness to move to a place where you don't know anyone, where you don't have a job. So these are our community values, and we embody those, and that's why we're called Pistachio. If you move on to the next one, we are founded by relocating spouses. So my name is Aditi Patil, and I am the co-founder of We Are Pistachio. And Dipali is on this call. She is also a relocating spouse and has experience in entrepreneurship as well. So we are relocating spouses. Our website was built by a relocating spouse. Our community, everything that we do is created by relocating spouses. So with that, I will hand it over to Lynn again. It is my pleasure. Thank you so much, Lynn. I know you have an extremely busy schedule, and I know that you get how tough relocation is and how tough it is to find a job in a place where you don't know anyone. So thank you so much for giving and sharing your expertise with us today. Over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And I want to talk a little bit about why I am interested in this community and why this is near and dear to my heart. But for logistical purposes, there's a guide that everyone should have. And if you don't have it, Aditi can send you the link. It's a Google link. There's nothing to write into it, so you can just follow along today, but If you do want to make a copy of that for yourself within Google, you certainly can. And if you want to follow along with that during the presentation, or you want to have it after the presentation, it's really up to you how you want to use that. All right. So I'll get into my introduction in a second. First, I want to talk about what we're going to cover, and then I'll even kind of cover the why. There's one thing that's not written on this slide is, what is the context for all of this, and why do I care? What type of experiences have I had that have informed why I want to do this business and how I do this business? So that's kind of the assumed bullet that's not on here. But after we go through that, we'll talk about how do you determine if you're qualified for a role? How do you move beyond your transactional job search networking? So I know that networking is a confusing thing and sometimes an emotional thing and an icky thing. So let's talk about some tips for making that a little more bearable and a little more authentic. And then we'll talk about how to use social media. It says like Fairy God Boss because that's one group that I work with, and I encourage you to use that, but we'll really be focusing a lot on LinkedIn. Due to time constraints and really telling this to you guys, I don't think we're gonna get a lot to the third point, but it's on your guide and there's some tips on there in case that's something that you want. And there'll be some Q&A where you guys can help drive this conversation. So it really, it's pretty structured and formatted, but there's also Q&A, but like 3 or 4 times for you to kind of help drive where you want this conversation to go. And before I get into it, what I want to say is thank you for those of you who filled out the survey. A lot of you said like, I'm not sure if I want to share this. So I'm going to just share the general questions that were in there without saying any names. So it was really cool to read those. What people were saying coming into this is, I'm coming because my challenges are, I have to make some sort of pivot. I saw that a couple times. I need to make some sort of change. And that's something that I work with a lot of my clients on. So we will address that part of it. Not unexpected at all. Some people said, I have a gap in my resume, or they didn't say that, but I know some of you might not be working currently due to visa restrictions or just making the move and not having found a job yet. So that's something that we're going to address as well. And then with the relocation, what happens when you don't have a network here? And how does that work when you don't have that? So those things are going to kind of be baked in. I also will put it on you guys to, if I am not kind of weaving those in enough for you to say, hey, in this situation, this is my challenge, or this is where I'm still feeling like I'm not really sure. So part of showing you these kind of objectives and seeing what I heard in the survey is so you guys can keep me honest about making sure I'm really tailoring this to those specific questions. So who am I, and why do I start with this slide? So from an external standpoint, why does this community and why does this particular audience, like, why did I want to do this? You know, I feel like I'm kind of parallel to a relocating spouse experience, because I moved to South America. I moved to Colombia in 2009 having a job. So I was not a relocating spouse. I was only 25 at the time. And that was something that I'd always wanted to do. So I had that experience of living in another country, but I already had a job. So that's obviously very different. What was interesting is, fast forward, I met my husband there. He's Colombian, and he wanted to move to the States, and he really wanted to do his master's degree initially in Canada, but we looked into that and thought, oh, I think that's going to be kind of hard. So we thought, okay, he's going to get his master's degree in the States. We kind of planned to get married, and then we got married in April of 2014, and then we were going to move in the summertime. And I had started a business in Colombia, so I thought, okay, this is a perfect opportunity for me to do something new. Working with my business, I got really hungry to do something different and more, but I also was still really passionate about education. So I thought there has to be a way that I can pivot. And it seemed like a really ideal time to do it. What I didn't know at the time is often moving geographically and making a pivot at the same time isn't ideal. But I'm kind of glad I didn't know, especially because a lot of you are in a situation where you probably can't choose that. The pivot is maybe, informed by the fact that you have to, and I'm trying to mute
Yeah.
audio. I had it right there, and then for some reason it wouldn't let me hit it. See, are you able to do that?
No, I am not.
Okay,
I think because,
you'd think there's a mute all. Isn't there a mute all?
yes, there should be. Hey, Vidhi, if you can mute yourself, you're hearing some background noise, that would be awesome. Yes. All
I'm
right.
really sorry.
No problem. No
It's
problem.
again, I feel like that should be an obvious one, but I'm not seeing that as my choices. That's so weird. Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
I think we are good. Sorry.
Thanks. No worries. So the idea being that I'm kind of glad I had that, because when I moved here in a couple of years, I met a lot of relocating spouses. And so I'm actually glad that it worked out that way. What happened with me, the reason I tell you, here's my LinkedIn almost became my pivot, and I go into that, is LinkedIn made it harder for me to pivot. And I think we hear like, oh my gosh, this is such a great tool for you, use it. That's the thing I feel like nobody is saying, is there's all these things that are stacked against us when we're trying to make a pivot. I was able to get this job through someone that I hadn't talked to in a long time, contracting for Microsoft. And the initial contract was actually lower than would have made had I was a teacher in the state of Washington. I used to be a high school teacher. That's what I had done for 8 years. And at this point, I decided it was worth it to take that leap and do a $24 an hour job. At the time, Microsoft contractors weren't required to provide benefits, so I didn't have sick days for the first 6 months of that and I didn't have any health benefits throughout the entirety of that were provided for me. So I took a risk and I did that, and that led to what I would consider to be a successful pivot, and I was really happy with that. But I think we have this idea that someone who I really have worked to make myself an expert in job search strategy. That doesn't mean that I'm coming at this from a pedestal. The thing that I have discovered and my clients have taught me is that no matter what level of success you're experiencing, you're going to experience really difficult emotions in the job search. So for me personally, LinkedIn scared the crap out of me. And I thought, oh my gosh, am I even gonna make that pivot? But also, I say that I got into this job because when I made this pivot to tech, I ended up at a really fast growing company. I ended up at Smartsheet, if you know it. I went there when it was fewer than 200 people. And that provided me a lot of opportunities to move up and grow. And I ended up becoming a hiring manager. But at the height of all of that, when on paper I was making what I wanted to make, I couldn't believe as a teacher now making over double what I made at that first Microsoft job. And I say that because I think transparency is so important if we're going to help each other. And then I hired 8 people to work underneath me, became that people manager. And a lot of things happened at that job where I ended up being miserable. And some of that is, I take responsibility for my own emotions, but also it can be really difficult. And I think I loved what Aditi started out in the beginning of feeling alone, because when I moved to Seattle, I felt extremely alone. And this isn't even obviously a new country for me. I had never lived in Seattle before, but that I had a month before I started work, and I wasn't supposed to have a month. And they called me like right after I arrived and said, you're actually not going to start till next month. And that month was one of the hardest months of my life in a lot of ways, because I didn't know anyone. So in that way, I can relate to what you might be experiencing, but I'm not even going to dream to say that I would know what that would feel like in another country, right? But also at the end of it, when I was at a place where on paper I looked successful and I did have friends in Seattle, I felt extremely alone in what I was going through and feeling this kind of shame. Like, I don't think my boss likes me anymore. He's always loved me so much, and now something's changed and I don't know what it is and I don't know how to fix it, and the shame that I felt about that. And since I started this business 2 years ago, that is the thing that comes up over and over again. I actually started my business because I was part of another community of relocating spouses because of a friend. And I started working with those women did some pro bono work, did some workshops for them, and then evolved my business thinking that I would be targeting only relocating spouses. And quickly, the people came to me saying, I've been on a break, but I lived in Seattle my whole life. I haven't worked for 2 years. One of my clients hadn't worked for over 20 years in a paid job. I remember the day that one client, potential client, I knew her through a community. And so she asked me out to coffee and she wanted to buy the coffee. And I let her. And the reason I let her treat me to coffee is I said, looking at her resume, knowing her, she's been in Seattle for quite a long time. She'll never hire me. She doesn't need me. I'm going to give her a couple pieces of advice and we'll go on our way. By the time we left there, less than an hour later, we had agreed to work together. We ended up working together for months. And she even put in writing one time, this is the best money that I've ever spent. But what changed for me at that moment was realizing that no matter how successful someone looks out on paper or how eloquent they talk to you, it doesn't mean that they don't feel alone. And it doesn't mean that they aren't feeling ashamed or fearful or scared about their own possibilities of pursuing the career that they want. So I want to expand that to say my clients often feel alone and feel these things, and some of them have an international background. Probably 15% of my clients have some sort of international background. Most of their education, if not work experience in other countries. And then the other 85%, I see that commonality. And I think that's part of the job search and what we go through as humans. So for me, that's really important to say because I want you guys to be able to ask any question you want and share that stuff and welcome you to, that's what we have to talk about here because it is so difficult. And that's what at the foundation makes looking for a new job, especially if you're pivoting, especially if you're in a new place, especially if you have some sort of gap in your resume, it makes it that much more difficult because we get in our own heads, rightfully so, because that's the messaging we're getting outside and it's normal and natural to feel that this is really, really difficult. So that is my soapbox, as we like to say. That's really what I'm passionate about. And that's why getting to know Aditi, when she started this, I was like, this is amazing. This is exactly from what I've seen, the women that I've talked to that are relocating would really benefit from what you're doing. I want to get behind it and help in any way that I can. So all of that being said, let's get into it. Let's get into the nitty gritty of this. Sometimes it'll let me with my arrow go on and sometimes it won't. And there we go. Okay. So this may on the outset seem depressing, but I think it actually gives you more of an edge than you realize. So in this whole idea of we often feel like it's just us that's going through this thing and it's because we're disconnected from people. What happens is you may feel as a relocating spouse and you certainly do have unique challenges. There is no doubt about that. However, what's happening is the hiring process is really going through growing pains in the States. So I can't necessarily speak to how much of this happens in other countries, but here, I've had the privilege of getting to know a little bit and hearing a woman speak, and she actually herself is not from the States, and she has a science background. She helps companies to de-bias their hiring process and improve their hiring processes. So what I had seen over the course of about a year and a half, I was talking to my sister because she helps me with my marketing. She previously worked in marketing for 3M and now she's at General Mills. And we were talking and I said, okay, I'm going to this conference. How do I want to market my talk at this conference? And basically it was the foundation of what you guys are going to see today. I said, oh my gosh, I know what's happening. I know why so many of my clients are struggling, even when on paper it seems like they shouldn't be struggling to find a job. Said all of my clients want to do something new and different or a new challenge. They kind of have to keep up with their skill sets, right? There's a lot of reasons people are sort of forced into a pivot, or they know if I stay in the same job for 8, 10, 15 years with changing tech, like it's going to be hard to go somewhere later. And what if this industry changes and all those types of things? So I said, I am seeing that candidates are wanting change and wanting growth, but job descriptions aren't written that way. That's not how people hire. And the two sides are hitting up against each other. Well, I got to that conference that we were writing that speech for. And there, sure enough, is this woman that I talked to about what she does. And she gave her presentation. And I was so excited because I was like, I know her work. I know she's amazing. And she said exactly what I was going to say in my speech, only she had the numbers and the data. So I was speaking from, this is what I see. She was saying job descriptions are written the same in the US as they were in the 1970s. They are asking for experience when job seekers are coming at this saying, I can do these things. I might not have 5 years of experience, but I am able to do the job. And so it's one of the reasons that most of my clients land jobs where they only meet 60% of the qualifications on average. And I'll get into some examples on that, but that being said, it is harder than ever. But if everyone else is struggling, those people who aren't relocating, it means that you are not as at much of a disadvantage as you might feel like you are. So a lot of people are struggling with it, and we're going to talk about the ways to navigate this. Unfortunately, it falls on the job seeker to figure these things out until the hiring process kind of catches up. And so in the meantime, these are the things that you can do to stand out, to be seen, to get around some of these processes that aren't working. Okay, the first one we have to talk about is, why is it so hard to determine if you're qualified? That is basically what I was getting at, is the idea that I'm seeing most people actually hire someone who doesn't meet 100% of the qualifications. So there's a famous article. I actually read it the morning of my contract, my first Microsoft interview. And it was very inspiring to me at the time. It's called The Confidence Gap from The Atlantic. And it said that on average, women will only apply to a job if they meet something like 100% of the qualifications, but men will apply if they only meet 50%. And now, as I'm seeing that people, the job search advice that I'm giving, and that the common advice is, we have to do this, because some of these are sort of hopes and dreams that a hiring manager has when they write the job description, and they're hiring people who don't necessarily meet all the qualifications. But what I want to say is, I don't necessarily think that if you aren't applying for jobs because you don't meet a lot of the requirements, it's because you're not confident. I think it's because it's confusing. How would you know that that's even something that's worth your time? So I want to give you guys kind of a quick test in terms of qualifications. And it's hard to do because there is so much nuance. But when we get into some of the networking stuff, that is going to be also help you figure that out. I'm going to encourage you to get out there and have people help you find your job as well, which will kind of circumvent this whole idea anyway. To have people say, hey, I think you'd be really good for this. I'm going to introduce you to this person. That is one way that we don't even have to just dig through these job descriptions. But in the meantime, I want to give you a quick test and a way to think about this differently. So I have two things here, and I actually added to this on your guide in terms of the questions I got for this. So the first thing, and I want to look at how you guys have it on your guide, there are two parts to most job descriptions. One part says, on a day-to-day basis, you'll do this, 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 and this. Another part says, we want someone who has this. What I really want you guys to focus on is, what would the day-to-day experiences be? Because when we look at them saying, I want someone with 5 years of experience, is it true that someone who has 5 years of experience is necessarily going to be better at the job than someone who has 3 years of experience? No. In many cases, we see this with our colleagues, the people we work with. Longer doesn't necessarily mean better. So when you look at, here's what you do on a day-to-day basis. If you look at that and you focus on that part and say, I can do 50% of those things or more, then that's probably a job you should be applying for. There are obviously hard skills and soft skills. So one of the reasons I'm able to say this is, I assume that as pivoters, a lot of you are going to be like my clients, where most of my clients work in fields that you don't necessarily have to have really specialized training for. So I work with mostly people in sales, marketing, project management, program management, learning and development, diversity, equity, inclusion, things like that, where a lot of these fields are changing really quickly, and there are things that can be learned on the job. So that's how I want you guys to think about it, is initially look at the activities, not the requirements. Whenever they look at, I have to have this many years of experience, I want you to really, don't let that discourage you. If you have a year of experience or you have adjacent experience, don't worry so much about the years. go back and look at what's required. Do I believe I could do the job? What we tend to do is we say, would I get hired for that job? That's where I see my clients get it wrong. And we get it wrong because we think that that voice in our head saying, I'll never get hired for that, is a real, honest voice. And it's really our own fears. And often our friends and family, or even our former colleagues, would tell us, I actually think that you could do that. It's not about whether you think you're going to get hired for it. It's whether you think you can do it. It's up to them to decide if they want to hire you. It's up to you to say, I can actually perform these duties. And then I think 50% is a good number. You know, you'll recognize if they want you to be able to code and you can't code. If it's, and light coding is one thing, but if it's a coding job, you know you can't do that, right? And the reason I am giving you kind of a loosey-goosey test and kind of trusting that you guys are going to be able to execute on it is this. I actually ask my clients to give me job descriptions. And the reason I do that is because me and my writing team, we write resumes and LinkedIn profiles and we tailor them to their target jobs. So they're not necessarily going to apply for these jobs, but these are the jobs that help shape the keywords and the focus of our work. And almost every single client I've ever had, I believe, I mean, it's exceptions that I can count on way less than one hand. So 98% of my clients plus are able to deliver me job descriptions after I tell them this, that they are completely qualified for. So I believe that if you guys kind of step outside of what you're used to thinking about it and look at it this way, that you're going to start to see these are the things that I can kind of throw myself at. And I think the best analogy is this. A couple weeks ago, a client said to me, I found this to be difficult. So what I did is I said, I'm going to go window shopping for a job. If I am looking at something, I'm going to pick it up and look at it. And even if it looks cool to me, if it looks fun to me, if it looks like something I would want to buy or want to apply for, I'm not just going to shut the door and say, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. I'm going to kind of explore that more. And she said that that framing helped her. So I know that's a difficult thing to do. As we move into this, this is kind of the next step to that. And then you'll notice Q&A is next. So as you start to have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. What I'd love to do is if you put a question in the chat, please put it in for everyone. I know Aditi is going to facilitate this. So we'll kind of figure that out in a second. Aditi, when you guys take questions, do you usually have the person talk and tell us their question?
Yes,
Great.
whatever works, yeah. So that we just say, hey, unmute yourself and ask. If they put it in the chat, then we can call on them in the order that the question has been
Love
put.
it. Yeah, and I just want to encourage you guys. I like to hear your voices. If you feel comfortable putting video, that's great. And I think it allows us to have, if you have a follow-up question, or I can kind of say, does that answer your question? So that's the reason I ask if that's the way you do it and if you're comfortable with that. So before going into our Q&A, here are the things that I think will help as you think about what direction do I want to go in? How do I make a pivot? How do I get back in the job market after not being able to work because of my visa or not having work because we made a move? First thing is, it is okay to pursue multiple types of roles. People will try to tell you the common advice you hear is you have to be super specific and you have to know what you want. There is a way to think about this. And that's why I say like a dream job or a North Star. Yes, you have to have a direction. Yes, you have to narrow the scope a little bit, but you don't have to narrow it down to one job title. And let me explain what I mean. I'll use myself as an example. So as I was pivoting, the first job that I landed out of being a high school teacher was actually on a team where we were essentially writers. We are content creators, but for the Microsoft sales team. That presented a challenge in the sense that that didn't really help me, except that it was in the tech industry and I had Microsoft. So I thought, okay, where am I going to go next? This is a year contract. It's going to expire after a year. And I won't know if I'm going to get my contract extended until it's way too late. So I better get my act together and start looking now. And so I, within my team, was able to take on 2 different projects to explore. One of them was with a woman who was assisting the sales team in selling Microsoft products to like public schools and public universities. And then the other side was with the lead trainer for the Americas, kind of being her assistant and taking on some of the initial onboarding training. It became clear to me through pursuing both of those projects that I really wanted to do training, but those would have been 2 types of jobs I could have been applying for. And I actually had recruiters reaching out to me when I was at Microsoft, like, and for things that I ultimately did not get hired for. So I didn't get the job, obviously, but one of them was like for Tableau in selling it to universities, and one of them was for a smaller local organization thinking about selling like leadership trainings. So there's all kinds of ways that you can take this. As someone who has an education background, you know, I could pursue those two areas as well as content creation, instructional design. It's okay for me to pursue those kind of 3 areas and market myself toward those 3 areas and then see where I get the job. Because if I limit myself too much, I'm going to miss really good opportunities that could help take me to where I want to go. And that's why you want to have your dream job, your North Star, kind of where do you want to be in a few years? Because if I'm going to take a job that isn't exactly what I want, and that's why I say the stepping stone job, as I take a stepping stone job, I want to make sure it's taking me in the right direction. You know, obviously there's a point sometimes at which financially someone might need to take a job, but ultimately, if I'm going to make some concessions, how can I use it to get my foot in the door? How can I use it to go in the direction that I want? What job is going to give me the experience I need or get me in the organization where I'm going to be able to make another pivot? How do I go ultimately in the direction I want to go? And last is messaging. The way that you're able to pursue multiple things is by saying to people, here is what I'm interested in as a whole. And if it fits into these things, I want to pursue it. So for me, I'm able to say, you know, what I'm really passionate about is learning and development. I have done that internally training, and I have done that in terms of building training programs. I've done that in terms of training customers. I don't have to say, oh, I only want this type of job. What I have to do is think about how I'm going to present myself. And if I message it correctly, I can sound like I'm being very concise and decisive, but that doesn't mean my messaging has to be one particular job title. Awesome. So let's go ahead. Are we ready, Aditi? Do we have some questions in the chat yet?
Yes, we do.
Great.
So thanks, Lynn. So just for Q&A, I'll put your question in the chat and we'll call on you in the order that you put it in. I would, in the interest of time, please restrict to one question for now, and then if you want to come back and ask another one, if there is time, we'll do that, just so that everybody has that space. So our first question is from Milena. Milena, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hello, Lynn, and hello, everyone. So my question is, should we include our maternity leave in our resume? Because I had a baby like almost 2 years ago, and I was ready to come back into the job market, but because of this virus situation, we are still at home. And now I'm trying to get a remote job. So should I include my maternity leave and the gap in my career in my resume?
Yes, I love this question. And it's fun when you ask a question where I feel like there's a pretty clear answer. I have never, ever seen anyone say anything on the contrary. So what I would say is, you always, whenever there's any type of gap in your resume, you don't want to leave a recruiter or a hiring professional wondering what you were doing. I'll tell you exactly. So when I was a hiring manager, part of what I'm really thankful I had the opportunity to do was, I was in my, I'm 36 right now. So I was probably 33, 34 at the time. And my recruiter was a 26-year-old white guy who had, I'm pretty sure, never traveled much in his entire life. And I don't say that to villainize him. He gave me really good candidates, right? And it was on us. In fact, I learned throughout the process in ways that our hiring process, we could really get some of those bias out and find better candidates with capabilities and actually experiences, things like that. But I had conversations with him where I would get to hear what he was thinking. And he told me once, he said, when I see a gap, I don't know if the person is at home with their feet up on the couch. And I thought, the research shows that 42% of women take breaks. And so that is people who aren't up against visa issues, who aren't necessarily raising children. And we're seeing more and more men take breaks. So what happens is, and I like that he said that, even though I don't like that he said that, because it allows us to say when someone can't picture what's happening, and they might not even know, depending on your name, like with yours maybe, but sometimes they don't know people's gender from your name. They're not actually assuming that you're doing childcare type stuff. So naming it out is the way that they no longer are just picturing you on the sofa, right? Like, I'm like, who would do that? But the thing that I want to say is you don't have to tell them exactly what you are doing. So if you want to find a company that is friendly toward the fact that you're a mother, and if you're going remote, that might be a good way to go. You can say, this time was for childcare. You can say that. And you don't want to give too much information, but you can do that. Some people, you can tailor it to what you want. Like, it's none of their business what you are doing, but you want to give them a little bit of insight so that they're not going from nothing. So you want to name it out, but you think about what you want to say. For example, if you had a serious health issue, I've worked with people I had a woman who had a stroke in her early 30s, late 20s, right after finishing like a PhD or a master's degree. I wouldn't necessarily say that because they may worry that she's not up for the job, even though she is. So you get to decide how authentic you want to be, always be authentic. But being authentic doesn't mean that you have to tell them every single detail, but do put something to say, I was doing this during the time, as opposed to like having them wonder.
Okay.
Thank you so much
Thank
for the
you.
question.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Milena, and nice to see you here. All right,
Thank
so
you.
our next question is Anka. Anka, you want to?
Yes. Thank you for organizing this event, and thank you, Lynn, for the great advice. I have a specific question about our LinkedIn profiles. And you mentioned that recruiters were reaching out to you, and that was one channel through which you got opportunities. My question is how to optimize your profile to make sure that recruiters see you in their searches. So apart from having the feature open to opportunities on LinkedIn or having your location updated, what other things you recommend? Thank you.
If it's okay with you, this is such a good question to that point where this is going to be like a third of what I want to talk about. I'd love to come back to your question. So I'll kind of answer it as I'm going, and then I'll come back with you. What was your name again?
Anka.
Anka. Okay, cool.
Perfect.
I'm going
Thank
to
you.
specifically say, Anka, did I answer your question at that point? One of the things I want to ask you, and this is more of a logistics thing at ET, is I suspect, because usually when I do this presentation, I kind of have like 45 minutes to an hour presentation, and then I have Q&A time. I have 15 extra minutes to go over. And since we're recording, that would give people who have to leave a chance to watch it on your YouTube channel. Would that be okay if we went about 15 minutes over?
It would be okay with me.
And Q&A is built in, so that way if you have a question, I'll grab it. Like, let's say Anka had to go before I answered it. I'm kind of answering it later, and then she can watch it on the YouTube channel. I think we'll get to that one, though. But such a good question to the point where I have a few things planned for you on that, and want to have visuals to go with them.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Perfect. All right. We had one question regarding gap, Siley. If that was not answered, then let us know, because your question was related to the gap.
So she explained while I think Milena's question, she was like, so I understood how to explain that.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
Perfect.
Awesome.
All right. And then we have one more question, Marquita.
Yes.
Do you want to come off mute?
Hi.
Hi. Lynn, congratulations. I saw you on TV yesterday. But
Thank you. I was way more nervous than I looked, I swear.
I had a question about job requirements. I've been looking at jobs and they say those 3 years, 5 years, something like that. But I feel like my application is getting weeded out because I don't have, that 5 years that they're looking for. And they say that's like a requirement, job description versus requirement. How do I overcome that?
I'm really glad you said that. Because here's the thing, and this is the story that I think is going to help drive this home. Before the data on this, and obviously I have anecdotal data in the sense that my clients come to me because they need help, right? So for some reason, but if you saw a lot of their resumes, I've had clients who worked at Amazon, who are currently employed by Amazon, who lived in several countries with Amazon, who have worked for Harvard, who worked for Columbia. crazy things. Two clients with VP titles. A lot of times they're not necessarily, it's not like I normally work with VPs. I normally work with more individual contributors, managers, that type of thing. But the idea being that these people are also getting weeded out. So the idea is, a lot of what I'm helping people with is realizing that the system's broken for more people than we think. And so the whole idea of what we're going to talk about next in terms of networking is the way to circumvent that system. So here's the story. I have a friend, and we kind of did a barter, if you will. And she decided that she wanted to leave her organization. She was working at kind of like a hot startup. It'd been around for a long time. It'd grown a ton in the few years. It had gone public. And she actually had initially gone to school for information systems, so she can code. And she works with one of the most, she doesn't like work on the app, but she works with one of the most kind of hot softwares out there that almost every company uses. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be cake for her, right? Like, how many people can code? How many people have used this software? And she went and interviewed with companies, and she struggled. And what I mean by that is people were asking, like trying to put her in a box and be like, well, have you worked with this software? It's like, have you seen what she can do? Obviously, you should be able to see if she can learn that software, she can learn this one. We know she can code, so she can do all these things that a lot of people who've used Salesforce don't know how to code and are good at it. If she can, that should help us extrapolate, right? So she was someone who wasn't getting nearly as many callbacks as I thought she would get. What happens is, with my clients who are pivoters, who are people who are on breaks, but then you have the ones that are like, the reason I get people who look like they're currently really successful is because those people are usually trying to get out of a toxic work environment. And so they're having the same emotions that the rest of us are having. They're not feeling qualified because they haven't been told they're doing a good job in years. And they're like, I don't even know if I'm contributing because no one will tell me, right? So with that group of people, when they apply cold, when they just apply online, they're getting a callback or some sort of email acknowledgement 1 out of 10 times. So what that means is, overall, applying cold is usually a waste of your time, period. And you being filtered out is not because there's something wrong with your requirements or you're not qualified enough. It's because everybody's being filtered out, because no one knows exactly what keywords they're supposed to hit or who is getting through and who's not. It's often actually through the networking process, who's been referred, who's part of the manager and current team's networks, like things like that. So what I'm going to propose is that you guys just use these networking strategies to try to get around the system. And some of them can be used in conjunction with applying. So you can apply to a job, and then often it's a good idea to start doing some of these in the companies you know you want to do, but also if you've already applied, then you can start knocking on doors as well. And so to kind of help boost your chances, knowing that you can apply, but then also how can you start getting into contact with people at those companies and things like that. Awesome. I want to say there was like one of the things I found is there's one job that I got by just applying cold online. And I think we often say, okay, I have to work at a company with a big name. I worked at a company that got a big name, or got a much bigger name when I worked there. And it was much, much easier statistically to get in early. So I encourage people to look for some of those smaller companies. In Seattle, when we think startup, we think, oh my gosh, I'm going to end up at a company with 5 people with no stability and no benefits. There's a lot in between. There are many companies that have 50 people, 100 people, 200 people, 500 people that still aren't well known. And through sites like Built in Seattle or Power to Fly, or not neglecting things like Indeed and Glassdoor, you can find those companies that might not seem as sexy to other people that are still going to give you all the benefits you want and the experience that you want. So that's another thing, is look for some are smaller companies or less well-known organizations, because those are usually the ones that applying cold will give you more than a 1 in 10 chance. Great question. Cool. Are we ready to move on to the next section?
Yeah, you are. Thank you.
All right. So keeping an eye on my time here for you guys as well. How this kind of gets into exactly what Anka was saying. How do I stand out and be seen? So your LinkedIn profile, and I want to grab my notes here in terms of, there's so much I could say. There's a short answer and there's a long answer. So I want to give you guys the things that you could do that would take you less than 20 minutes. There's 2 things. So I'm not going to go in order of the guide, but number 1 is make sure that you have a photo and make sure that that photo is sort of like professional grade. Often it really does come down to whoever you live with or whoever you're close to taking a picture on their cell phone in front of a white wall or a solid wall. Like, we think this has to be perfect. We think we're not going to get a job unless we have a professional headshot taken for hundreds of dollars. No one really cares about that as long as they can see your face. You look like you're not angry in the photo, and it doesn't look like there's other people cropped out of it, and it's not blurry. So make sure you get a photo on there. Someone could take that and fix that today or tomorrow, right? And then the other thing is this, and so it's number 3 on the guide, I believe. When I get people's resumes, when I'm going to work with them, I see a 2-page resume, often something like that, with lots of really good bullets on there. But then I go to their LinkedIn profile and all I see is the titles that they've held. Underneath the professional section, you can put an explanation of what you did under every single role. For some reason, people aren't doing that. Well, the reason that's problematic is the way that a recruiter uses the search engine, it uses LinkedIn as a search engine, right? They go in and through the system, they're able to put in keywords and pull people up. We often hear all these fancy, complicated ways to be seen, but the truth is if you simply bring those bullets from your resume and put them into your LinkedIn profile, you're gonna have 10 times more relevant keywords in your LinkedIn than you did before. Your titles will not let you be pulled up on searches in a lot of cases. Those bullets will. So you could do that today. You could take and copy and paste those bullets from a resume into a LinkedIn profile. And so those are the 2 things you could do that are really quick and easy. I'd encourage everyone to do that. Like by the end of the weekend, do those 2 things, and that's going to make a big difference. Getting into it a little more, in your headline, it's really weird. You'd think that it'd be okay, but it's kind of considered something that you don't want to do. Don't put in your headline that you're looking for a new role. Someone alluded to this. You can see the instructions I included on the guide in terms of how to turn on that button. For some reason, I think LinkedIn thinks that I'm a recruiter. I guess technically I have done a tiny bit of recruiting. So I can often see that when I go to your profile, who has that button turned on. I see exactly what it looks like. And they do hide it from your current employers. But my advice to people, I work with a lot of master's programs and undergrad programs at the University of Washington. Turn that button on and don't ever turn it off again. Because that way, every time you start to look for a new role, you've already had people kind of knowing you can explore new opportunities at all times. And you kind of have a reason and excuse when someone says, oh, if they catch you or you're worried about them catching you with it on, which I don't think that's a big deal anyway, but we always have that fear, then you're gonna be able to say, I always have that on. And there's no reason not to keep it on at all times. Of course, if you're getting a ton of active reach outs, then at times you might want to turn it off. And then looking at your about section, really focus that on the things that you've done. And I know that can be trickier if you're making a pivot, but a good way to take this level deeper is avoid adjectives. Give me examples of what you've done. That's going to stand out more than saying, I'm a strong communicator. Everyone's going to say that. Even if they're not strong communicators, they're going to say that. And we can poke holes in that and say, people always think that about themselves. How can you say, I've given presentations? I have been a translator. I have, been a spokesperson for my company. Those are the kind of evidence that are often used in many, many job descriptions. That's going to help you get a leg up. I want to speak more specifically to what Anka is saying, because if you're making a pivot, which I assume, as countries, a lot of people are forced to make a pivot. Like someone said in the survey, I'm not able to do the work I was able to do in my past country. And that's really, really common. I've seen that a lot. This is essentially why I have a business, because the work that I do with people and building their LinkedIn profiles and resumes is very kind of tedious and to go through, but I can give you the quick and dirty and say that what you want to do is you want to take job descriptions, kind of using the requirements we talked to. You want to go through them and audit them and kind of mine them for the things that you've done. And then instead of just trying to hit keywords, actually say, when have I done something that's like this, that's related to this, or is this? And look and see, did I call that out on my LinkedIn profile and resume? And that's how you do it. That process normally takes me and my team 15 to 20 hours with someone, some with them, some on our own. It is lengthy, but it can be done on your own, and you can do it. If you do 10 or 20% of what me and my team do for someone, that's going to help you get seen more. With you guys, I don't think that a lot of you are necessarily going to be getting proactive reach outs that way. I'll tell you what made a difference for me. When I had Microsoft on my resume, that's when I started to get proactive reach outs. But there are other ways to get a job besides just that. And you know what? I don't think I've ever taken a job from a proactive reach out, because often the people that are reaching out to me aren't the ones that the jobs I want to pursue. So just because you don't get proactive reach outs doesn't mean you can't land a great job. And so we'll kind of go into next how you can stand out and be seen even more if your LinkedIn profile isn't perfectly optimized to what you want to do. I think, and I have to look at how I have my slides here. It doesn't, I don't know why it it's because I do it on the wrong side. Before we get to that, there is actually one more thing I want to say that's on your guys' guide. This is something that I think is one of the most useful tools to pivoters. You can and should be posting about where you want to go. Show yourself as someone who does reading and knows what's going on in your industry and in your desired roles. So I have there, one is targeting specific companies and following those companies. Again, if you pick companies that have 40,000, 100,000 people are super famous, it's not necessarily going to make as big of a difference. But if you choose smaller companies, that'll help. You should follow them, and you should be interacting with the things that they put on their LinkedIn profiles. Posting, commenting, reposting, likes don't mean a lot. And also with people who work there. So when someone works at a company, get in touch with them, and we'll talk about that in terms of networking, but you can post things on your LinkedIn profile about the work that you want to do and the work that you have done. And this is how I know this is impactful. If you were to post something about a company that you want to work at, a new thing in your industry, just something that, anything that's related to your profession, if you were to post an article about that once a month, within 6 months, you would have more activity on your LinkedIn profile than most people, even people who work at LinkedIn, because I often will go through their profiles, have. So this will put you above and beyond. So many seasoned professionals aren't doing this. And this is a way you show up in people's feed. This is a way that you be seen. And when people click on your LinkedIn profile, this is what's going to keep them there. Seeing that you're active, you're able to tell someone so much more about you than just looking at your professional experiences. What are you reading about? What are you researching? And what are you telling the world about? And all you have to do when you post an article is take any quote that you like from an article, 1-2 sentences, put it in the post. You don't have to say anything more than that. That's going to get people's attention. So I think the posting is one of the things that's going to make a big difference for you guys. You really, even once a week would be above and beyond. So you can plan them using a tool like Hootsuite, get it all done at once, or you can literally just go on there about once a week. If you miss a week, not a big deal. Just get some activity on there. So when I go to your profile, I'll see it, and you're showing up in my feed more. Cool. What do we have for questions?
All right, we have one question from Anka.
Awesome. Let's circle back to.
I forgot we are allowed one question per person, so I will skip mine.
You can ask it quick. That's wrong.
Go for it.
Yeah, I was thinking, so posting will get the relevant people on your profile. And wouldn't it be better if you have something like open for opportunities on your profile because they understand what's your ask from them? Or do you just recommend reaching out afterwards after you see they checked out your profile a couple of times?
So it's really weird because it's going to seem like I'm talking out both sides of my mouth. There's a way that you show people you're interested in. There's certain things that are kind of considered desperate. And it's hard because I want you guys to express enthusiasm and be out there, but also kind of avoid those faux pas. So the problem with putting it on there is this. If you write it in your headline or you write it in your about section that you're open to new opportunities, it's kind of like you standing on the street corner or standing outside of your desired company with a sign, right? You're like, don't I want to let people know? Of course you want to let people know. That button does it for you. And so that's the best way to use it. In turn, I don't want you to stress about using technology perfectly, but because that button's there's no reason that you have to do that. And so using that button is one way to show hiring professionals that you're using the tool and that it shows you is just like a little bit more tech savvy. So that's what you want to do. I also wouldn't encourage you when someone shows up at your LinkedIn profile, don't write them back and say, hey, I'm open to new opportunities. because they're going to know that when they go to your profile. What I would do is if someone shows up on my profile, I would follow that person. In some circumstances, I'd connect with that person, but I wouldn't mention that they were on your profile. I would look for something, we'll kind of go into this, but I would look for a reason to connect with them and then go from there, but I wouldn't necessarily mention it outright. If people want you to contact them about specific jobs, they'll write that in their LinkedIn profile, right? So I know you'll see where I'm getting into this in a second and kind of how to build up to that. Such a good question. Cool. Aditi, were there any other questions in the chat?
Nope, not at the moment, but keep them coming, folks. We'll get to them.
Awesome. Okay. If there's one thing that I want you to do, like I gave you some quick things you can do, right? Because I know we go through different levels of emotions in the job search, and then on top of everything else we're going through, I know for me, this is like more than ever true that I have days where I'm like, I'm going to do my minimum today because this whole thing is really, really difficult, right? Like what we're going through, all of us, in being isolated and things like that. So if you're going to take a big strategy and you're ready to use your thing, I want you to leverage your network. If you have a little bit of energy for the day, I want you to kind of do those quick and dirty things I gave you for your LinkedIn profile, like bringing over your bullets. There's kind of two types of things. But if you're going to truly say, I need to step up my game and I need to be strategic, this is the one thing that I want you to do. And I want to give you two examples. I have two clients that both were, one of them didn't really pivot, but she had not had a paid corporate job. So nothing, she had done some volunteer work. I don't even think any of it was paid. Maybe a couple projects here or there for over 20 years. She was really looking to get back in her 50s because she'd gotten divorced. And she said, I am good right now financially, but I'm not going to be later on. I need to get a job. Plus, like now my kids are a little bit older. I'm ready to get to do something for myself. And she had come from the tech industry. So that's a big challenge to say, how do I get back into the tech industry when I haven't done that for that many years? This is what she'd been doing. And she came to me and she'd been looking for a job for 2 years by the time she came to me. And she had made an attempt to leverage her network, but as I kind of talked to you guys about what we're going to do here, she said, it's not working. How do I need to shift this? And so I'm going to tell you about the shift that she made. The other client that really, I have a lot of stories about this, but these are the two that are kind of good examples, I think, for you guys. She had some health things that went on, and basically for that and other reasons didn't work for 2 years. And she was able to use this kind of strategy to land her first ever director role. And what's interesting about her is she came from a really small company. So she didn't have that big name on her resume, not to mention she was in the middle of a gap. And the director role she got was actually in building a new team for a customer success team where she had worked in marketing and she had worked in support. So she'd actually never worked in customer success. So she ended up kind of making that pivot was a place that made sense to land. So this is the strategy that they used. We often think about job search networking as what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on LinkedIn and I'm going to find someone who works at the company I want to work for. So we'll say, okay, I would really like to work for Oracle. I'm going to find someone who works at Oracle and I'm going to send them a connection message and I'm going to say, would you refer me to work at Oracle? And there's a reason that this does not work, right? We think of this as networking, but realistically, let's say a lot of people I truly believe want to help you. They do, but first they're in an awkward position because they don't know you. So in order for them to feel comfortable referring you, they'd have to get on a call. But then knowing that you want the referral, what if they get on a call with you and they don't feel like you're a good fit? They would have to like kind of reject you. That is really awkward. And a lot of people are going to avoid that, right? Just because they don't want to hurt your feelings and they think it's easier just to not do it. The other group of people say, yes, I'm totally willing to get on a call with you and say like, if I'm going to refer you, this is what I need to do. But you now fall on their to-do list below all of their obligations in life, their friends, their family, their work, their children, their spouse, everything. So they put it on their to-do list and you're at the bottom and it's there for weeks and weeks and eventually it falls off, right? So it's not that people don't want to help. It's that we have to do something different because that sort of job search networking is the thing that we feel weird about. That's the reason we feel like networking is gross because that doesn't feel authentic for a lot of you. And it's the equivalent of cold calling. right? You can have a list, if you're a salesperson, you can have a list of all the people who in theory, they own your competitor's product and you know your product is good. But if you call them and they don't know you, you're probably going to get the phone hung up on, right? And that's what we want to avoid. The best tool that you have for getting a job is the people that you already know. And so this can be tough in the sense that you might be new to town. That's why this community is so important. And there are ways that you can meet people who want to help you. But you want to first start, instead of thinking about the job and saying, okay, who's the person I know who works at Oracle? I'm going to say, I need to be more open-minded about what type of company I'm going to work at. If you are currently working at Google or you're currently know how to develop or something like that, sure, going straight for Oracle makes sense. But if you have a gap, if you're making a pivot, how can I work at a smaller tech company? What's my stepping stone job to Oracle, right? And so the way to figure out what that stepping stone job is to have meetings with people. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to think about the people who are closest to you. And what I think is difficult about relocating spouses, and there may be some sort of, a lot of people have feelings about this, sometimes culturally. A lot of times the person who is best to help you with this is your significant other, especially if they're the reason that you moved to this area. So it's not that you're asking your significant other to refer you or find you a job, because yeah, that would be weird and that would be inauthentic. But what I want you to do is sit down with that person, and I want you, and it should be someone you're close to, friend, family. If you meet people socially, the idea though is don't go looking for the person who you think is more close to the job. Think about who knows you and who kind of already is willing to vouch for you. And you're going to have a conversation with them. You want it to be a separate, like a phone call, or if it's someone you live with, have that time kind of set aside. Don't try to do it when you're doing other things. And what you're going to do is you're going to say, I know that in order to find a job, I have to expand my network personally and professionally. So what I want to do is I want to just start having Zoom calls or phone calls with people who are professionals, who are employed, and they might not be in my exact area, but I know I can learn a lot from them. Is there someone that you know that would be willing to have that conversation with me? And I'm not going to make them feel awkward. I'm not going to say, hey, will you give me a referral? I'm just going to ask them for their advice. And then when they give you that name, you're going to do that with the person. You're going to set up a Zoom call, set up a phone call with that person, and you're going to say to them as the ask, I am new to the community and I really admire what you've done here, or I really think your job sounds cool, or it seems like we have something in common in terms of our interests, whatever. Could I just get on a call with you for 15 minutes and ask you about how you did what you did? People love to talk about themselves and they love to give advice, and you haven't set them up to feel awkward. So when you get on the phone call with that person, it's the exact same thing that you did with your significant other, except you have to explain it a little more. You're going to ask them questions, truly ask for their advice. I'm looking to get a job. Here's kind of what I want to do. It can change. If you don't know the exact thing, that's okay. Ask them questions and listen honestly to answers and seek that connection. And then at the end, the ask is the same. This was such a joy to talk to you. I really enjoyed your energy. Is there someone else that that might be able to give me some good advice about how I'm going to get into this field? It's okay if they don't, if they try to say, well, I don't know any hiring managers. Say, that's okay. I really just need to expand my network personally and professionally. That's the thing, is when people want to help, they'll feel awkward if they can't do what they think is the helpful thing. So you're actually taking what they're trying to do and you're making it easier. You're bringing it down. And a lot of times, if they do know someone who can hire you or who works in the field you want to go into, you haven't pressured them. So they're like, this conversation was enjoyable. I liked you. I'd be totally willing to introduce you to that person. So often they will introduce you. They're going to try to get you as close as they can. But that way, you're going to take this along. So what I want you guys to think about is, if you can have 3 phone calls or 3 conversations with people that you know, and every one of those can lead to one more, and you can have this with 15 meetings. I often tell people, I think you will find your job in 25 meetings, but if you can have 15, I think you also have a really good shot. So it's often the job you're going to find is through the person of the person of the person, and there's research to support this. most people find their jobs through their weak connections, not their immediate connections. But we don't know who our significant other knows, or who their friends know, or their colleagues know, or who the person we've been hanging out with, the people that live in our neighborhood, the people who are friends with our kids. That's another great one. Moms bond with moms all the time. Moms want to help moms. Those type of people, when you have that social relationship and that personal relationship, you just ask for their advice and you say, who else do you know? It's often 2 or 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 steps from the person you know is where you're going to find the job. And this is how Emily found her job. This is how Margaret found her job. Those 2 people I just told you about changed their names. But this is usually the people who have the biggest on paper challenges, like a gap or like a big pivot. That's usually where they're able to find their job. It can be hard and it can be scary and it seems like a lot of work, but you're planting seeds, and it's like getting an interview without getting an interview, because by the time that you're on step 3 or 4 and you're talking to someone who potentially can give you a job, that person, you have that chance on the phone, on the Zoom call, to win them over. And then they no longer, you're not on their to-do list. You're not just a weird person who reached out through LinkedIn. They actually know you and they've actually developed a little bit of a relationship with you. I assume that we're going to have a lot of questions about this one.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, that's so helpful, because Lynn, that's the number one question people ask me all the time in our community is, I don't even know anyone. How do I even begin to network? And I think you answered that to say, just recapping, start with your closest inner circle and just make your way out, and then go deeper and keeping it that informal. So I think that is great advice. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it needs, people have struggled with it. Even those who are trying to leverage their network, they would come to me and say, I think I've already been doing this. And I say, okay, try this instead. And that's with Margaret, for example. She felt that when she came to me because she felt she'd exhausted her network. But sure enough, she is currently in a contract gig consulting for Amazon Web Services. And now that she has that on her profile, there's no longer a question that she's someone who is up to date in what's happening in the tech industry.
Great. Awesome. And I know so do we have time for questions?
Yeah.
Lynn? I want to be mindful. Okay, so
Nope, we're good.
if you have any more questions, and it doesn't matter if you asked one, if there's space, we'll get to all of them. So type in your questions and we will get to them.
And I have one more thing that I'm going to do a real quick thing on too,
Go
so
ahead.
we can take some and then I can take some more at the end if we need to.
Yeah. So no questions yet, but comments on how that your advice was valuable. So you can go ahead.
Awesome. So here is the fear. The fear is for me that if I give you this next thing, you're going to prefer the second thing to the first thing. But I would say that what I just told you is probably how 70% of my clients get their job. And what I would tell you is actually, I mean, the numbers are probably even more skewed than that. This is kind of, okay, I see a job I'd be perfect for. I applied to it, or I want to apply to it. How can I increase my chances? Because my theory is that I often talk to people having a multi-pronged approach is, you're scheduling these meetings and you're waiting for them to happen. If you have a little bit of downtime, what can you do in the meantime? And if you see an open role, why not apply to it? And I would say, if you're spending more than a third of your time applying to things cold, like if you have 3 hours a week on your job search or 10 hours a week on your job search, if you're spending more than a third of that applying cold, that's probably where you're going to feel discouraged. And you're not going to hear a lot back from that. Know that. So I don't want you to get discouraged, but also I don't want you to dump most of your time into the least effective thing. This is kind of slightly more effective. So if I'm like, okay, I only have 2 people I can set up meetings with right now, while I'm waiting for those people, or while those are happening, they're scheduled, what am I going to do? You're going to make friends online. So instead of just kind of like attacking people with your ask, what I want you to do is use the follow button. I want you to follow people on LinkedIn. Now, the trick is that some people aren't very active on LinkedIn, so following them isn't necessarily helpful. But what you can do is you can look on someone's LinkedIn profile and see if they have activity. So I would say you're going to search for people on LinkedIn who are in your industry. Honestly, anyone who's in your area, who's gainfully employed, second connections, people who work at the companies you want to work at. And if you're strapped for time, you can just follow and see who shows up in your feed. If you have a little bit more time, you can investigate who's active and who's not. When you see that someone doesn't really post, like they don't create their own posts, and maybe they don't comment very much, if all they do is like or not even that, then you might as well go ahead and connect with that person and connect with them and look for something you have in common, right? The people especially that are most likely to connect with you, are there other people who are from other countries? They're going to relate to you. When I say that I work with a lot of people who took time off to raise children, moms will say exactly what Aditi said. I've had so many women. One woman, I got a meeting at HBO because of this. HBO said, we want to look at your candidates. And this was back when my model was a little bit different. But I was like, what am I even doing here? Is because the woman who brought me there really wanted to help other moms. So I think that the mom route's a really great way to go, but it's because they relate to you. And so you want to find people who you have something in common with, connect with them, send them a quick connection message. And then the best way is if you can find people who are active, you can post things, repost things that they post. You can comment on things that they comment on. Because this is the way that we truly make connections with people, is showing up and saying, I'm interested in you and what you're doing, and I want to make a connection with you. I'm not just trying to use you for what I can get out of you. And so if you're in that situation where you're like, okay, how can I make friends with someone who's not very active or whatever? I'll give you this analogy. Often I'll show up for people and I'll try to say, what can I offer them first? Because people often get the sensation when you ask first, it's like, oh, okay, I'm just a taker. But I will show up to, and I put a note on there for recruiters. Surprisingly, recruiters aren't often the people that you guys want to get in touch with. It's more the people that would be your peers or your hiring manager. There's a lot of really companies that have big referral bonuses. But the idea is with recruiters, I will reach out to someone and I'll say, hey, if you have any difficulty recruiting for roles, let me know. Often the first thing I'll do is repost the roles they have open, because I've done something for them without anything in return. It's okay when you've done something for someone else, when you've done something first, to come in and ask for something. But what is weird when you ask for something first is it feels like I'm not going to do anything for you unless you can do something for me. Then it feels transactional. Then it feels like I'm not gonna give anything unless I get something in return. When you show up and give first and take interest in what other people are interested in, and that's where it's helpful to follow people and watch your feed, because you can see in your feed who's posting and what do they care about. And ultimately, too, one of the ways to bring this together is, are there organizations, and right now we have to really go with the digital thing, but are there organizations that you can join and go to digital events and kind of be involved in, so that you also now have that connection to say, oh, we both went to this thing. Can I want to follow you or repost this. Get involved with what people care about and look to make genuine friends with people, because then it doesn't feel weird. And then you already have a little bit of a connection with someone. It's okay to leverage the people you meet for help. But what it feels weird is, I'm not going to help you unless you help me. Or I'm showing up and asking, but I have no idea if you're the type of person that's going to pay this forward.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave you guys some instructions on the guide, and I know there's going to be questions about that. So I'm going to let you guys kind of take that away in terms of, so maybe we'll go for 5 more minutes if there are questions.
Yeah, there are 2 more. One, Piper had a question, and then we'll come to Marquita. So Piper, you want to go ahead?
I'm in my car, as you guys can see. I'm not driving, but I'm in my car, getting away from my children. Thank you. My question's really specific, and not to I was a military spouse. I still am. My husband is a reservist, and we live here permanently now, which is great. I just don't know how to kind of narrow down. I've done a lot of different jobs based on where we live. We've lived in rural areas, we've lived in cities, we've lived in, all these different things. And I don't know if it's like a job coach or talking to you privately, obviously, or hiring someone like that. I just don't really know how to target better. I'm very social. I have a great, I've been here about 3.5 years. So I've got like kind of the mom network and different things like that. And I just am kind of like, I don't know who I talk to. I don't know who does that. Who do I talk to?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously that is what I do, and you're welcome to talk to me, and you can look on my website and see kind of like my range of costs. I also have some group, like I'm now doing group classes. So if you guys follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn, Instagram is where I give most of my free advice. So if that's the level you think you're at, please feel free to show up and engage with me there and watch my videos, IGTV, all that stuff. But I would say probably what for you to decide if you think you need to hire someone is to say, do I have people in my life that I think can help guide me in this who are friends and acquaintances? So to go out and say, where I've seen people do this successfully without hiring someone, depending on like who they're able to lean on in terms of like their own strategic cabinet, if you will. So if you were to go out to people you trust and say, here's what I've done, here's what I enjoy, where do you think it'd be marketable, and talk to 5 different people and then look at it and say, okay, from what they've said, is this helpful? Does give me a direction? Because the idea is it's okay for you to pick a couple areas and just go at them. But I think your question gets to where am I most marketable? And I actually think while you can see how your question's specific, I think it's everyone here is kind of thinking the same thing. So it's a great question. And that's my philosophy is, can I put enough things out there for free in my marketing that's going to help you guys kind of do it yourself? Because those people who are going to do it yourself, you're going to figure it out. But if you are trying to do it yourself and then you get stuck, the next level up is, do I have people in my life, they can't dedicate the kind of time a professional can I kind of piece this together with like a do it together method? And then if that doesn't work, or I don't feel like that's working, then how do I vet a professional that's right for me? And with anyone who'd even consider working with me, I really welcome you to go to my Instagram, especially if you want to get a sense of who I am and stuff like that, and vet it out and see if it feels right. And then from there, we have a conversation to decide. But it's not a hard sell, because if you can do it by yourself, I want you to do it by yourself, because I want to provide value to those who really need it, if that makes sense. So see if that works for you in terms of going out and talking to those people, but you're welcome to connect with me at any time that it feels right for you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
Like I told Lynn once before, that if there's someone who I trust with, if I would ever have to get back into the job search, I would go to Lynn in a heartbeat. So you do check her out. We have one last question before we wrap it up. I know, Lynn, you've been so generous and stayed on. So Marquita, you had one question, so take it away and then we'll wrap it up.
And so, Lynn, I had a question. You're filling out all these applications and they start asking these questions about demographics, male, female, what's your race? Are you a veteran? And I'm like, by answering those questions, is it helping me or is it hurting me? And, how do I decipher if I should give that information or if I should just say, I don't want to answer?
So on the outset is like, I don't know the answers for sure, but here's what I do know. The laws that are in place mean that they shouldn't be looking at that at all. And I don't think that they even have access to that. And I'm thinking maybe DT knows more of that. If you have any doubt, I would say just don't fill it out, because it's definitely not helping you, because they're not supposed to be using it either way. Obviously, when you get into the interview process, that's where they can physically see you, they can hear accents, they can make an assumption about, what gender you ascribe to, all those things. So I think often if you look at a company's LinkedIn page and you look at what they're putting out in terms of their marketing, you can tell who is really looking to truly be diverse and equitable and inclusive. And so I would look at that. And the other thing really comes down to the way that you end up in a company that is going to be the most equitable is to be in a company that has the most pay transparency as possible. And as possible is weird, because I think that's just happening. But for me, like, I jumped on an opportunity to recruit for a friend of a friend because he was willing to tell me and say I could post the range from the beginning. And so that I thought, okay, that's going to give everyone a much more fair playing field. So if you have any discomfort level, I would say just don't fill it out. It shouldn't be helping you. But I think you'll get a sense if you kind of research a company in terms of if they're doing things for, you know, the right reasons, and if they are looking to really have a diverse team. Awesome. I wanted to say too, first of all, my going over is definitely in the way that I planned this. So I knew I packed way too much content in this, and I said, I'll go for it. So it's not me being generous. It's me just saying, oh, this is kind of what I wanted to do. And a little bit of time is not a big deal. Super happy to be here.
Yeah.
And then, gosh, there's something else I want to say in terms of, what I do want to say, and this is because I'm worried that there are people out here who want this and need this. If you go to my website and you look at what I work on, it's funny because it doesn't outright say this. It might in a couple places, but usually the question that Piper is asking is the thing I work with most is I don't know what direction I want to go in. I don't know what the job title is. That discernment piece is baked into all my programs. But I'm also really excited about the fact that I'm currently doing this Career Boost program, which is more of a class and it's a group environment. And that is going to happen again either mid-August or September. So if, you know, the one-on-one stuff doesn't feel right, it's not in your price point, there will be opportunities coming up to join group programs. Please follow me, and there'll be opportunities to do like a free webinar to get more of a taste of that. And then I'm also launching kind of an interview class as well that'll kind of couple with that other program. And that's probably going to be July. So look for that and follow me if you're interested in that. I know that the one-on-one might not feel right for everyone, whether it's a price point or something like that. There are other opportunities to work with me if you want to, but you feel like from a price perspective you can't. I don't want you to think that's going to insult me if you're not ready to make that kind of investment. I want you to come in and get what you need in whatever way makes the most sense for you.
Perfect. That's awesome. Lynn, I just want to say thank you so much. I think from the time I relocated to Seattle and I went through my own challenges, it was my dream to get together a group of women and just help support each other. And that's what we're doing. And thank you, Lynn, for really supporting us, giving us, and thanks to each of you for coming in and investing time in your own development and your own self on a Friday. I mean, that I really want to acknowledge all of you for that. So you can connect with Lynn on her socials. About for VR Pistachio, I've put in a couple of links here. We do a couple of webinars every month. A lot of them are recorded. You can catch up previous ones on our YouTube channel. We have a private Facebook group, which some of you are members of. So good to see some of you here. So join us there. We share lots of resources. We have a great community, and we have two events coming up next. Thanks, Lynn. So next, we have a coffee and conversation series. Some of you have attended it. We just get together on Zoom, grab your choice of beverage, and just come and talk. Anka facilitated our last one. So it's just a great way to connect with people and get stuff off your mind. I find them immensely valuable. So that's on May 29th, next Friday at 4 p.m. And then next in June, we have somebody who's going to talk about building your personal style with confidence. You know, now especially, how do you show up on Zoom? You know, how might you show up in an interview? So just that whole sense of style and just the confidence aspect. So we have that. I've dropped the link to register the Eventbrite in the chat box. So we'll look forward to seeing you there. And finally, how you can stay connected. If you go to the next slide, I have a podcast. If any of you would like to be interviewed on that, join our Facebook group, send us an email. If you have a testimonial about how much you love this session, Lynn and I would appreciate this as well. Again, thank you, Lynn. It's funny that we haven't met in person, but I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We will see you next month.